All right, today we're jumping into a really powerful story. It's about a city's big dream, a promise of a home, and, well, the pretty tough reality that followed for thousands of people. We're heading to Colombo, Sri Lanka. So let's set the scene. Go all the way back to 1921. An urban planner named Patrick Guttis had this incredible vision for Colombo. He called it the Garden City of the East. Picture it, parks everywhere, beautiful tree-lined streets, basically a perfect blend of city life and nature. It was this amazing utopian idea. But now, over 100 years later, you gotta ask, right? Did that beautiful garden ever actually bloom for everyone who lived there? And to really get what's happening on the ground, you have to hear from the people living through it. This quote is from a resident named Ronnie. She was moved as part of something called the Urban Regeneration Project, or URP. And her words, wow, they just cut right to the heart of it all. They gave us the keys to these apartments, but locked us permanently in poverty. I mean, that really tells you something, doesn't it? The keys to a new home don't always unlock a better life.
So, how did Ronnie end up in this situation? Well, it all ties back to Colombo's big push to become a so-called world-class city. And a huge part of that plan was, well, moving the city's poor out of their homes, communities where they'd lived for generations, and into these huge, identical high-rise apartment blocks. The result? Something that many people are now calling vertical slums.
And life inside these places, it's just grim. This is what Ronnie describes as her daily reality. We're talking paper-thin walls, so you have absolutely no privacy. You can hear everything your neighbors are saying. The elevators, so broken that residents actually call them death traps. On top of that, there's a constant barrage of fees you have to pay to the Urban Development Authority, the UDA. And if you fall behind, they threaten to cut off your power or your water. It's just life under constant, unbearable pressure. And this quote, it just says it all. We are the dirty secret they stacked in a concrete block and forgot about. From her own apartment, Ronnie can actually see the brand new gleaming Lotus Tower. That tower is the symbol of the very world-class city she was kicked out of her home for. Think about that contrast for a second. This shiny new city, built by literally stacking its long-term residents in concrete blocks and hiding them away. But here's the crazy thing. It wasn't always like this. Not at all. In fact, Sri Lanka used to be held up as a model for how to do social housing right. So what happened? How did things go so wrong? To figure that out, we've got to rewind and look at the completely different paths the country has taken over the years. Okay, so Sri Lanka's housing policy has been like a giant pendulum, swinging back and forth. In the 70s, you had these really radical reforms, basically giving property back to the people. Then the 80s brought the famous Pramadasa era, which was all about community involvement. But then, in the 90s, the pendulum swung the other way. The focus shifted to private money, to big capital. And by the 2010s, that had morphed into the urban regeneration project we're talking about today, a mix of military muscle and speculative cash, all aimed at beautifying the city. And this really breaks down the two completely different ways of thinking. You've got Pramadasa's model on one side that was all about being community-led. The state was there to support, not dictate. People upgraded their homes right where they were. It was about giving people power. Then you have the URP model, totally top-down. The state just provides a box, you're relocated, torn from your community, and stuck in a uniform high-rise where you're basically paying fees forever. The difference couldn't be more clear, right? And here's the thing about that Pramadasa model from the 80s. It actually worked. It really did. This idea of in-situ upgrading, basically improving homes right where they stood, was a game changer. When people got legal security over their own land, what did they do? They invested in it. They put in their own money, bit by bit, to build stronger homes, to get hooked up to electricity and clean water. And this approach is actually credited with stopping Colombo from developing the kind of massive, sprawling slums you see in a lot of other big South Asian cities. 1 million houses? I mean, that sounds incredible, doesn't it? 1 million brand new homes for people. But was that what was really happening? Let's dig a little deeper. Well, this is where it gets interesting. Critics say the name, the Million Houses Project, was more of a brilliant marketing slogan. Some even went so far as to call it a scam. Now, why would they say that? Because the government wasn't actually building 1 million new houses from scratch. Instead, it was playing the role of an enabler. It was giving people the tools, the loans, the services, the legal rights to upgrade the homes they already lived in. So don't get me wrong, it was a super effective policy, but the name? Yeah, it was a little misleading. All right, so that brings us to the 90s, and this is the major turning point in our story. This is where everything changed. The whole philosophy behind housing just flipped. Suddenly, it wasn't about the people living on the land anymore. It was about the needs of speculative capital, big money investors looking to make a profit. And that new philosophy led directly to the Urban Regeneration Project, the URP. On paper, the goal was simple: beautify Colombo to bring in foreign investment. But how they did it was, let's just say, highly controversial. The Urban Development Authority, the UDA, was actually put under the control of the Ministry of Defense. Yeah, you heard that right. That meant the military was now involved in urban planning, which in this case meant clearing people off their land to make room for luxury condos and shopping malls. And the way these evictions happened was just brutal and chaotic. I mean, just try to imagine this. Officials show up at your house unannounced and just spray paint a number on your door. That's it. You're left totally in the dark about what happens next. People were handed documents they had no time to read, and often they weren't even in a language they understood. Evictions were sudden and forceful. We're talking about stories of bulldozers starting to tear down homes while families with babies, with young children, were still inside. Just like that, communities that have been built up over generations were wiped out. Okay, so let's fast forward back to today. We've seen how this top-down, profit-first model was put in place. The big question is, how did it hold up when things got tough? Well, a whole series of national crises have put it under a microscope. And frankly, the cracks are showing everywhere. It's really been a brutal 1, 2, 3 punch for these residents. First, the pandemic hit. Being locked down in these tiny apartments felt like being in prison. And tragically, domestic violence rates went up. Then came the massive economic crisis. Soaring prices forced families into making impossible choices, like, do we buy medicine for a family member or do we pay the electricity bill? And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, the third punch landed: IMF-led austerity. That meant higher taxes and cuts to subsidies, which just pushed these families who were already on the brink even deeper into poverty. And look, this isn't just a few sad stories. The official numbers are absolutely staggering. According to the World Bank, Sri Lanka's poverty rate more than doubled in just 4 years. It shot up from about 11% in 2019 to almost 26% in 2023. Think about that. 1 in 4 people living in poverty. And that, of course, has a direct, devastating impact on a family's ability to pay all those fees just to keep a roof over their heads. So how is this financial pressure enforced? Well, there's a really powerful term for it, coined by the Colombo Urban Lab. They call it the weaponization of the grid. And here's what that means. Because the UDA controls everything in these buildings, the water, the electricity, they can use it as leverage. So if you fall behind on your housing payment or even your electricity bill, they can just turn off your water. They hold a basic, essential human need hostage to make sure they get paid. It's an incredibly powerful and scary tool. So, after all this, where does Colombo go from here? It really feels like the city is standing at a major crossroads, and the choices it makes now are going to define its future for decades to come, especially with all the pressures it's facing. And the challenges are just immense. First off, land values in Colombo are going through the roof. Then there's overpopulation. The whole western province is just packed, with nearly 5 million people in and around the city. And as if that's not enough, you've got climate change breathing down the city's neck. We're talking extreme heat, terrible air pollution, and the constant threat of flooding. The pressure is literally coming from all sides. At the end of the day, this whole story really boils down to one single fundamental question. What is housing? Is it a basic right for every citizen, an entitlement? Or is it just another asset, like stocks or gold, for investors to buy and sell for a profit? That right there is the core debate that's shaping everything that happens next. And you can see that debate playing out right now. On one side, you have think tanks like the Avocado Institute. Their proposed solution is simple: let the market handle it. End state involvement, get rid of those old laws that protect renters, and just let private companies take the lead. They argue it'll create prosperity. But on the other side, critics are waving a huge red flag. They're pointing straight to the 2008 global financial crisis, which was caused by that exact same thinking in the U.S. housing market. So the question is, for an already vulnerable economy, is that a risk worth taking? And finally, let's not forget the human cost in all of this. We're talking about the very soul of the city. Because the working class people who are being pushed out, they're not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're the lifeblood of Colombo. These are the people who cook the food, drive the buses, build the skyscrapers, and clean the offices. They're also a huge part of the city's political life. So when you push them out, you're not just creating a housing problem, you're literally hollowing out the soul of the city. So we'll leave you with this final thought. Colombo has a choice.
We know from its own history that successful, people-first housing is in its DNA. The city knows how to do this right, how to empower its communities. So the question is, will it rediscover those principles from its past, or will it keep going down this road where that original dream of a garden city becomes reality, but only as a beautiful walled garden for the rich, with everyone else locked out?